Hi, and we are at Roots Tech 2025 live. Speak on it, history and genealogy conversations with Janice and Chiricana. I'm Janice,
This is Sharikana.
and we'd love to introduce our guest on location live.
I have been fangirling from afar for so long. Please let folks know your name and what company you're with.
Hi, I am Brooke Ganz, and I founded Reclaim the Records almost 10 years ago. We are a nonprofit. We work virtually, so I can't even say where we're based other than the US and on the internet. And we work to get records reclaimed from government agencies, archives and libraries, departments of health, federal agencies, whatever government institution has them, and we work to get them back to the public. And the way we do this generally is by suing them under Freedom of Information laws and then taking the records we win, putting them online for free public use.
Serious business, serious work. As genealogists, Reclaim the Records is a phenomenal resource. I don't know when I found out about it, just online. And I think I gasped, like, oh my God, someone's doing this work. So tell folks, how did you get started doing this? What's
Yeah,
the
that's
story
what I
about
want to know. Yeah, what's the inspiration for it?
Yeah.
This started with me just feeling very frustrated. I grew up in New York. My whole family's from New York originally, like many generations. They got off the boat and were like, we're here. This is great. But then I married a guy from California and I moved to California, and I've been in California for 21 years. And I was home with two young kids. I used to be a web developer, and then I stopped to be a full-time stay-at-home mom for a couple of years. And I was hoping I could do some more research from New York, or rather from California in my New York roots.
Right.
And I would look back across the country and I would think, they're going to put those records online one of these days, right? Like they're going to do deals, whether it's New York State, New York City, like those records, those amazing things that they hold in the archives, or the city clerk's office, those things will be available. And so it's okay that I live on the other side of the country from where I grew up, and I'll just have access online. That's the way the world's going.
Right. Well,
right?
you think, yeah.
You would think, but it didn't happen. They didn't do deals with any, institutions to scan stuff. They weren't really pursuing grants at that point to scan things. They're underfunded, as a lot of government agencies are. And year after year, nothing was happening. And their attitude was, you can come sit in the New York City Municipal Archives and crank through a microfilm reel, but you have to be here in the building, and you have to, be here on a certain date, a certain time. And of course, microfilm is like the least of the issues at that point. And I couldn't just pick up and fly across the country with two little kids at home.
Right.
So I got very frustrated. That's really how it started, is like, there's got to be some way to get these records and get a copy of them. There has to be a way. And it didn't seem like there should be a problem because, well, these aren't restricted records. I could see them in person. So what if I just asked them to make a copy? And they're like, we don't do that. Like, but I think you kind of have to do that because this is a government archive. Taxes pay for this.
Right.
The records are paid for with taxes. There's no privacy implications. All the people, or almost all the people in these records, are dead.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm
There's
just
a
like,
problem.
this doesn't make sense. I know this is not how people do it, but there's got to be a way to get a copy. I'll figure out how to get microfilms turned into images and the images turned into a website, because I have a web development background. I can do that. Like, I'm not asking anything from you guys other than to make the copy. I will pay you for the copies. I will pay you for the shipping, whatever it takes. And they were like, no, no, no. Well, it turns out that the answer is yes, if you use Freedom of Information laws. So in 2015, as my New Year's resolution to myself, I'm like, I am tired of asking nicely. I'm tired of giving like the logical reasons of why there should be a copy. I have to make this happen. And I think the only way that this is going to happen is if I file a state Freedom of Information law request with the New York City Municipal Archives. And then if they keep saying no, which they did, I think I have to sue the archives. And
Wow.
I did. And I was kind of freaked out by that. I'm like, I've never heard of
Most
somebody.
people would have just said, you know what, okay, this
Forget
is
it.
not my, and to me, it's just amazing how you had question after question. And then it's like, well, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? And then it's like, well, I see a need, and then it needs to get done. And then you're like, oh, well, the only way to do this is to sue them. I probably would have been like, oh, no, I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I can,
'Cause
I
it's
want to
so
take that
stupid
on.
to say
Right.
that.
It was scary, and it was
You know?
hard to find an attorney at first, but luckily we ended up with an attorney. I ended up with an attorney who is still the attorney for our organization
Oh,
all these years
right,
later, who's been
right.
fantastic.
Do you know why? Why were the attorneys? Was it just like they're not familiar with that area of law? Were they a little freaked out by it?
I
Or?
think it's hard to find people who do this very special work of freedom of information law
Right.
advocacy. And I wasn't even looking for someone to do it pro bono. I was happy to pay if I could find someone good. And it was very hard to find someone to take the case. And I'm really glad we did it. It's a very special niche, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they overlap with other sort of civic do-gooder types of law. Our attorney, this attorney we found who's been with us for 10 years, is also one of the top attorneys for suing the NYPD for 10 years. And that's
Oh.
exactly the same sort of advocacy,
The
civic.
energy, and you're fearless,
Yes,
fearless.
exactly that sort of thing. And a lot of it was that they were withholding records from his clients. And we worked together to sue the archives, and it worked. Basically, we filed the case and they said, if we give her what she wants, will she go away? And I'm like, yeah, I just want the records, honestly. And so then a big box of microfilm showed up on my table, in my kitchen table in
So, but
California.
how did the organization like come? Okay, so
Okay.
you're one person, you
was
want
just-
these records,
it was-
you sue. So then it's like, oh, well, why don't I take this another step? I don't know that I would have done that. So, like, what made you say, okay, if I'm experiencing this,
Right.
are other people doing it, and why don't I come up with this organization?
It was honestly, it was just that everything snowballed from that proof of concept. Like, oh, this works using freedom of information laws, state level freedom of information laws. It works. It can happen. And I was just asking the first time for a specific record set of New York City marriages, the index of New York City marriages from like the 20s and 30s. It's like, well, but there's other record sets that are in that same building. I could get those. Wait, but there's other organizations that are just in New York City, like the clerk's office, which holds the full marriage records. Wait, but there's other areas of the state. I could ask for the state birth, marriage, and death index, which I later did. Wait, but there's other states. Wait, but there's the federal government, and they have records too. And you can use freedom of information laws to make them give you copies. You don't have to ask like and beg and be like a supplicant. It's like, no. My taxes pay you.
Hello.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
And that was the mental shift also.
Yeah.
And part of it, I think, was that I have a lot of family who are lawyers, and I was expected to become a lawyer, and I like pulled up and aborted the landing at the last minute. I took the LSATs and like had almost everything done on my applications.
Yeah.
At the last minute, was like, I don't want to be a lawyer. I really love tech and I want to work in tech. And my family thought I was crazy for that.
This is how the law found you.
Yeah, a little bit. But we work with the law now, and we hire lawyers, and we read through their briefs and we give our comments. And obviously we have the genealogy background, but we're also working with people who have the legal background. And it works out great.
It's amazing too how like genealogy or just sometimes it starts out innocent enough, right? I have a question, I want to know when so and so got married, right? And then we find out that it has all of these deeper implications on like a social level, political level. And I mean, who would have known now genealogy is turning into like this sort of an advocacy space.
Yes.
But before we kind of get to that, like, why do you think some of these like government, agencies are like so reluctant?
It's a good question. Like people say, like, well, then why wouldn't they have given you the records? Like it was legally, there was no impediment to some of these things. There have been more cases we've done more recently where it is more of a balancing test or more of a tough issue. We started with what we thought were the easy cases. And I think a lot of it is one, they've just never done that before. They've never been in a position where they are treated like any other government agency. No one's ever been that aggressive. And maybe that was a mistake. A lot of genealogy has been people getting together in social groups to discuss their grandmothers and then eat some donuts and coffee afterwards.
Right.
Which is lovely too, but it wasn't what I wanted. And I didn't see any group doing the real advocacy work beyond writing letters. I mean, like real advocacy work, doing, lobbying and suing, honestly, making enemies possibly. I'm sure a lot of these agencies really do not like us. Actually, I know they really do not like us because one of the things you can do with freedom of information laws is read their emails because they're public servants and they're using public email addresses. Oh yeah, one of the things Reclaim the Records likes to do, this is not a secret except apparently to the government, is we like to get large swaths of their emails and read through how they discuss genealogists, what they think of us, what they think of our organization, what they think of records access or what they don't think of records access, and see all the fun names they have for us. It's
Wow.
nice.
And how many people do you have on the team, or locally or nationally, or how does that, what's the structure like?
I mean,
Can you
this
share
started
that?
originally just with me, but then eventually when I'm thinking, yeah, this needs to be a nonprofit. This needs to be a group of people. There's so much to work on here and there's so many problems going on with records access. So I just found other people working in genealogy or who were amateurs, but had this sort of like drive for the advocacy work. And so found random people across the country or asked them, and some of them had different backgrounds. One, is a professional genealogist who up until a couple of days ago was doing work for the Department of Defense to identify deceased veterans and to repatriate their bodies. Unfortunately, a couple days ago, they just shut off the money spigot on that, which is horrible. So she was on the board originally. There was someone who was a former CTO of Family Search who I had met at a Roots Tech conference many years ago. Then we had people who were just genealogy nerds like us, and who had that idea and that whim of like, I don't care if they don't like me. I would just like to get my records. And also a bunch of people who had New York specialty also, just because that's where it kind of started.
Right.
But there's someone on our board who lives in DC and is like the specialist in military records at the National Archives. And he's fantastic. He was their first citizen archivist. We just have random people who just like all came together like a superhero team, and it was like, all right, we're gonna just like be on the board together. And some board members do more than others. Some board members are just busy with other things, and some have real specific domain knowledge and do the research, and they're like, I think such and such should be a lawsuit. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to get their emails and read things. I'm going to get the records retention schedules. I'm going to do the legwork to show that such and such should be available.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, I wanted to just, talk about the administration really quickly, and also like how everyday folks can, any tips you might have for them, as well as how can they help with the efforts. But before that, so she knows Christopher Smothers.
He's on our board now.
Yes.
I was going to bring that up, but okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we both were probably. Yeah,
okay. I was saying people just like, they just appear, and he was amazing. And he
share a little bit about his story. Yeah, with Mississippi. Yeah.
He had been to the Mississippi State Archives, I believe it's in Jackson, and he became friends like with the archivists and people working there, and he knew what they had. He knew what they officially had, as well as what they didn't officially have. He saw that there were things. He knew that they had things on microfilm, and somehow he was able to finagle the deal where we got copies of things from the Mississippi State Archives, and hopefully we'll get more in the future, where they had just the death index, and it wasn't in great condition, honestly. Some parts of it, the original was not great, not just that the microfilms weren't great, but we got copies of that. We were able to scan it, and now it's online for free. And he's doing work with a million different projects across the South, and then he was working up in, I think it was Boston for a while.
Yeah. No, Mississippi is tough, and I had my own experience with Mississippi and trying to get information. It's the same thing you had, where I'm like, well, can I just get a copy of it? They're like, no, you need to come down. I'm like, I can't just go to Mississippi. They're like, no, that's not how it works. But so, it's great work that he's doing, and I'm glad he's able to do that.
We're hopefully going to do more. I mean, he's mentioned a lot about Louisiana and some of the parish records. You asked why do some of these places say no? And one of the reasons they say no, unfortunately, we have found a lot of them say no for money reasons, that they want to make money by being the only source of information. They are underfunded as organizations or parishes or counties or clerks, whatever they are. They are underfunded. I don't take that away at all. And unfortunately, many of them are about to get a lot less funding, which is a problem. But a lot of them respond to that not by saying, we're going to put everything online and we're going to work with, organizations and genealogists. They respond to it by saying, we're going to charge you X for one copy, or we're not going to get the whole thing online. We're going to like parcel it out, and we're going to make it a golden goose.
Yes.
Like we have this assets, and we found oil in our backyard, and it's ours, and we're going to milk it.
Right.
So that's something that happens all over the country, not consistently. There are some archives who are wonderful to deal with, honestly.
Yeah, there's some great ones.
But
they're passionate, but the entity of itself.
Yeah, and departments of health are really like that too. Departments of health will say things, because that's how we usually have to deal with a death index or birth index or things like that, unless it's so old that it's moved to the archives or the clerk's office. And a lot of them, like we found in Missouri, where we did a lawsuit that took us 4 years, but we won. In Missouri, we got the birth index and death index, and we only got that because someone emailed us. We have a website, reclaimtherecords.org, and someone I never, didn't know, emailed us saying, "There's no death index for Missouri that's public, and there's no birth index." The certificates would go public after 50 years, which was nice,
right?
But we just want them to list of names, like that's it. And so I actually got that email while I was sitting in my car outside a pizza shop waiting for them to make the pizza. So I was parked. And so I'm sitting there on my phone. I'm like, I don't know anything about Missouri. I've never been there. Let me Google what their laws are. So on my little phone, I'm Googling like Missouri vital records laws, Missouri state freedom of information law. They call it the Sunshine Law. And I saw that their law explicitly said, you can't get certificates except for X, Y, and Z, or you're this related, except a listing of people who were born on or who died on a certain date will be open. Just like a
Uh-huh.
listing of like, first name, last name, date, and certificate number. That's all that they would do. Like, well, that's better than nothing. What if I
Right.
just ask for every date?
Right.
Yeah. So I did.
Look
And
at that. Sometimes all you gotta do is ask.
well, that's
Oh. Maybe not. Somebody
Yeah.
got a suit.
I asked, and it turned into a 4-year lawsuit, which we eventually won. We had to find an attorney in Missouri, like the whole process all over again. So we had to go through finding someone who knew their laws. One of the reasons we think Missouri tried to say no to us is we found out that even though their law said you could give out this listing, the Department of Health and Senior Services in Missouri was taking that same data and sometimes even more explicit data and selling it over and over and over. And we know this because in discovery for the lawsuit, we got their rate sheets. We got multiple copies of their rate sheets because they would sell it to epidemiologists, they would sell it to anyone. And so if we got the copy of just the death index or the birth index and put it out there for genealogists for free forever, it kills their golden goose to some degree.
Right.
And that was a motivation.
That's deep. This is like a film. I have a movie in a script in my head already.
It's amazing. I mean, that a lot of these places, like they are, I don't want to explicitly say corrupt, but I will say corrupt.
This could be a documentary.
It could.
It really could.
Definitely.
Question. What about support? How can people support you?
That's a good
Right?
question.
I think that's
Okay.
important.
So I started out Reclaim the Records with just like the domain name and like a sign up here for my MailChimp mailing list thing. And that was when I did the first lawsuit against New York City because I was nervous to be like personal name versus the city of New York. It's like, that's
Of
really,
course.
yeah. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I need to invent a posse. So
Yeah.
that's when I bought the domain name and set up the mailing list. And so that on the very first lawsuit, it says Berkshire Ganz and Reclaim the Records
Okay.
versus whatever. But Reclaim the Records was just like an idea and you can all share in this idea.
Right.
So one of the things you can do is certainly sign up for our free email mailing list, which is still on MailChimp. And we just tell people what we're working on, what new records we got, like here's cool new stuff we're doing. As a 501c3, we can now take donations, which is very helpful because most of these lawyers don't work for free.
Right.
In some cases, like in the case of Missouri, you can win attorney's fees and then that can get recycled into the next lawsuit. So it does eventually sometimes pay for itself, but it takes years until you get to that point if you win.
Right.
Some cases you can win the records and even though you won the records and you were totally right, they're like, but we've decided not to award you attorney's fees just because we don't feel like it.
Right.
Federal cases are usually good. So federal FOIA, when we do more stuff against like the VA or USCIS, those have a better law in some ways that if you win those cases, you will almost always get your attorney's fees
Oh, that's
paid.
good.
But again, like 2 years later.
Right.
So
yeah.
we take donations, we take suggestions from people. If you want to help us, we would love to know more about places where you have had problems with getting access to just even basic indexes. Like there should be a basic birth, marriage, and death index for every state. Like that doesn't
Agreed.
seem like it should be a controversial statement,
Agreed.
but for these departments of health or agencies or archives, they're like, what do you mean you're going to put this online?
So then, do you have people that are your support, your backers? And when I say backers, not okay, like these are like maybe big wigs that are like, hey, we got you. You don't have to name them, but do you have I guess
You would
advocates?
need, I would
Yeah.
you would need folks
Like, are
that,
there
you know,
people, and you again, you don't have to name them, but folks that are like, we got you.
We have had a lot of support for the community, which is great, but a lot of the people, like they randomly just find us. It is not something we can apply for grants for because because you can't really get money from the government to go sue the government. So
Right,
I don't,
right.
I mean, if you know a government grant like that, please let me know. But so we don't sell anything either. Everything we get, all these record sets completely go online for free public use. So we can't make any money off those either.
Right.
So really the ways that we make money is donations from people around the country, from occasionally winning attorney's fees back, from wonderful people who
This is
agree
like
with-
really grassroots, work.
Yeah.
It really is.
I will say that people, actually organizations that have worked with us that have been very helpful, even if they can't officially work with us, groups like Family Search who have been so nice at, like, for example, scanning our microfilms if we win something in microfilm format.
Oh, great.
Things
great,
like
great,
that,
great.
like, because that to us would have cost a lot of money to
Right.
do a small batch scanning project.
Yeah.
So something like that, they'd be happy.
I'm thinking, I'm sorry to cut you off. I was also thinking maybe students. Have you ever brought in like maybe students in
We
like
had-
library?
Well, we had our first
science.
ever intern like 2 years ago, which was
Great,
fantastic. He was a
great.
PhD student in
Okay.
history.
Okay.
His name is Michael McCormick, and he was fantastic. He's actually around here somewhere at the
Oh,
conference. And what he did for us, he had a very specific project in mind. We had 2 projects, but one is not launched yet.
Okay,
The main one he worked on is he had ancestry on his mom's side from Maryland.
okay,
And he used to go to the Maryland State Archives in Annapolis all the time. And there were lots of records you could see if you were in the building using their websites. And they had scanned a lot of things themselves, which was actually really nice.
right,
So he looked at not just what the rules were for how you use the Maryland records, like what they said, oh, we can't put such and such online because that's our internal rule. Blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, actually, the law overrides the rule. That's the
Right.
thing you should always look at.
right,
So the law in Maryland under their, I think it was the Public Information Act is how they call their Freedom of
Okay.
Information law. They all have different names. The law said X, Y, and Z is fine to go online as long as you block out such and such. So he got like an enormous number of actual records, not just the indexes. A lot of them were Baltimore specific related, which were kept separately prior to 1972. But then he got tons of Maryland information,
right.
birth, marriage, and death certificates. They are all
Wow.
online now. And a lot of that, the archives in Maryland had it, and they were fine to work with. We didn't have to sue them or anything. But their policies were keeping them away from being really freely available, openly available if you weren't in Maryland. And now they're all online, all free, downloadable. And then
Excellent.
other groups come in, like other companies too. When we publish things, we're like, you can use it, you can do whatever.
Right,
They choose if they want to make an index where there wasn't an index before, like
Right.
they'll index marriage records which have the parents' names.
right.
They'll choose if they want to republish it. I know
Okay.
Ancestry, I believe, has republished some of it. I know My Heritage has republished a lot of it. I think Family Search is on the verge of republishing all of it.
Okay, okay.
So
Wow.
we just get it out of these agencies and we stick it on the internet, and then we have faith that someone is going to then take that and use it on
Got
other
it.
websites.
Got you. So, last two questions really quickly. Tips for people who are looking for records and they're hitting these roadblocks. So you mentioned maybe getting familiar with some of the laws on the local level, right?
Okay, so let's say you have a record set that you want there to be a free copy on the internet. The things you need to look at are, okay, well, what government agency holds it right now? Is that government agency subject to the state level Freedom of Information law? Because usually we're talking about state level records, not
Right.
federal. That's a bigger issue.
Right, right.
So every state has their own Freedom of Information law. The famous one everyone knows is FOIA, FOIA, Freedom
Right.
of Information
Mhm.
Act, but that's just federal. All the states have their own, but they're all named something crazy and different.
Ah,
So that's why they're not as
that's usually the
famous.
case.
Yeah, so you got to look up what is your state's Freedom of Information law. It could be the Sunshine Law, it could be the Right to Know Act, it could be, whatever. I think Utah has a law called GRAMA,
That's-
GRAMA.
Wow.
So or Oprah in New Jersey,
Right,
Open
right.
Public Records
Yep,
Act.
yep.
So find out what state law you have for that state that has your stuff and read it. There are websites out there, there are journalism groups out there that explain it better. And okay, well, does this law cover this record set? Is there really any way that they can't give out a copy? Is there a carve out for something?
Right.
Usually it's fine. A lot of times you can't use your state law to get an actual certificate, usually, but you often can get an index. They forgot to prevent that from happening. It could be reels of microfilm, it could be papers, whatever format they have, you can only get what they have. You cannot make an agency make a new record. Like
Okay.
whatever they have, like you can't
That's
tell
what
them to
they
index stuff for you. You can't.
I
But if
see.
they had an index, maybe they have it in their city clerk's office. Maybe the city clerk's office has like the local public cemetery paid for by public funds and has a listing of all the graves that someone did years ago and it's stored
Right,
there.
right. Okay, that makes sense.
Maybe it has a listing of wills. Maybe some states it doesn't always cover judicial records, but if the judicial records got moved to an archive or a city clerk's office, sometimes that's fine.
Okay.
So you have to do all this research and like me.
So you have to do pre-research
Okay.
to do your research.
Yeah,
basically.
you're looking at
Yep.
you're looking up the genealogy stuff, like what is this cool thing I want, but also what does the state law say about this sort of
So
thing?
I can get the thing I want.
Yes, and then you put the two together and you make your request to that agency and you're like, hi, I know you're used to genealogists coming in and saying, can I please have, but I'm actually here to say,
With
no,
some
no, no.
law.
The law says you have to give me copies. Now I'll pay for the copies. You're
That's
not going to
right.
get them for free. But they can only charge you the lowest paid person on staff who can do the work. And you often get like the first 2-3 hours free.
Look at that.
So
That's great tips. Thank you for that.
no problem.
And our last question, because I know you got to get back, but under this administration, and we don't have to go into the deep, we know what's happening. What are some of the challenges that you might be like anticipating and ways that you think
Oh.
about weathering?
Oh, big problems.
Storm.
Big problems.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so we're very concerned about a lot of these issues, especially at the federal level, but I think it'll trickle down.
Absolutely.
To the states and the cities.
The wealth never trickles down, but the problems do, right?
Exactly, yes, right. The cuts trickle down,
Yeah.
so yes, okay, so we'll start at the top with the National Archives. Now we're at the National Archives and Records Administration. They've already had their entire senior staff gutted. They've like I think it's 6 or 7 of the top people just gone. Not just the Archivist of the United States is gone. They've had a lot of probationary people cut, to the point where the Kennedy Library was briefly closed. They are facing
God.
major cuts probably next month. Right now, or it could be later this month. We'll see. There are rumors that some of their buildings are on the we're going to sell this building list.
Right.
Like that building is full
Yeah.
of records.
So, yeah.
Sweetland, I think, is one of the ones they're talking about. They're talking about some of the local, regional hubs. It's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying, and it's going to have a real problem. It's going to make a real problem for us to all get the records out of these buildings. There's going to be fewer buildings potentially, but also fewer staff and knowledgeable staff. I should say fewer knowledgeable staff, because the person who is currently in charge suddenly of heading the National Archives is like some young marketing major who used to work for a private institution and does not have an archival background or a legal background. And suddenly this kid is
there.
yeah. It's kind of remarkable what's going on right now, and horrifying. But also a lot of the other agencies, especially at the federal level, have records that are really amazing that never had gone over to the National Archives. Like, for
Right.
example, the VA. The VA,
Right. Oh my gosh.
we won a lawsuit against the VA a couple years ago, and they have incredible
They
material.
had my ancestors' pension file.
Yeah.
I thought it would be at the National Archives, but it's at the VA. Yeah.
A lot of VA records are still at the VA warehouses around the country, never got scanned. We, through one of our lawsuits that we just won against the VA, built a little mini website called birls.org, BIRLS.org, where you can go online for free. You can search through records of veterans benefits files, and you can request them using FOIA for free right there on the site. You push the little green button next to the guy's name you want, and they will send off a FOIA to the VA. The VA will send you back your records for free.
Awesome.
This agency, the VA, holds amazing things, and I am very concerned that they are currently facing enormous cuts, and I don't know who's going to process all of these new FOIAs that we're sending them. And it's like that for a lot of agencies. So while there has been frustration for years, which is why we exist, I think it's going to be kind of a crazy couple of years, and it is even more important that we get these records back out to the community, get them free, get them online, make them widely publicly accessible, not just even in the National Archives, but just online, free, unrestricted, because that's the safest place for them right now.
And we have to continue to work together, collaborate, and support one another. So
Collaborate, support,
thank
and
you so
keep fighting a good
much.
fight.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brooke.
I'm gonna spell out the website for our
Okay,
listeners.
here we are. Reclaimtherecords.org. That is our website, and you can keep up with all our many diverse projects we have going on across the country and at the federal level. We have a lot of lawsuits in progress right now that we haven't even touched on because we're not supposed to talk publicly about our ongoing lawsuits, but there are many of them. And if you have access to court tracking software, you can probably find us in a couple locations near you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Brooke.
so much,
Thank
Brooke.
you.
It was a pleasure talking with you. And I'm going to stop the recording. All right.